16. Just before dawn next morning, I shone the torch on his white face. "You again," he squeaked. "More 27 and 53, I said. "Food of the gods," he said. I squeezed through the tea chest to his side, held the tray for him, and he hooked the food out with his finger and slurped and licked and chewed. "Nectar," he whispered. "How do you know about 27 and 53, I said. "And his favourite. Used to hear him on the phone. 27 and 53, he used to say. Bring it round, bring it quick." "You were in the house?" "In the garden. Used to watch him through the windows. Used to listen to him. He was never very well. Couldn't eat at all. Used to find his leavings in the bin next morning. 27 and 53. Sweetest of nectars. Lovely change from spiders and mice." "Did he see you? Did he know you were there?" "Never could tell. He used to look at me, but looked right through me like I wasn't there. Miserable old toot. Maybe he thought I was a figment." He dropped a long, sticky string of pork and bean sprout onto his pale tongue. He looked at me with his veiny eyes. "You think I'm a figment? Don't know what you are." "That's all right then." "Are you dead?" "Huh. Are you?" "Yes, the dead are often known to eat 27 and 53 and to suffer from arthritis." "You need more aspirin." "Not yet." "Anything else?" 27 and 53. He ran his finger round the tray and caught the final gulps of sauce. He licked his pale lips with his pale tongue. "The baby's in hospital," I said. "Some brown?" he said. "Brown?" "Brown ale. Something else Ernie used to have. Something else he couldn't finish. Eyes bigger than his belly. Something else I used to dig out of the bin, long as the bottle hadn't tipped over and spilt everything." "Okay," I said. "Brown ale, sweetest of nectars." He belched, raged, leaned forward. I shone the torch onto the great bulge on his back beneath his jacket. "There's someone I'd like to bring to see you," I said when he settled. "Someone to tell you I'm really here." "She's nice?" "No." "She's clever?" "Nobody." She'll know how to help you." "Ha!" He laughed, but he didn't smile. I didn't know why, but I started to tremble again. He clicked his tongue and his breath rattled and sighed. "I don't know what to do," I said. "The garage is going to bloody collapse. You're ill with bloody arthritis. You don't eat properly. I wake up and think of you. And there's other things I need to think about. The baby's ill and we hope she won't die, but she might, she really might." He tapped his fingers on the garage floor, ran his fingers through the fairy balls that lie there. "She's nice," I told him. "She'll tell nobody else. She's clever. She'll know how to help you." He shook his head. "Damn kids," he said. "She's called Mina," I said. "Bring the street," he said. "Bring the whole damn town." "Just Mina and me?" "Kids." "What should I call you?" "Huh?" "What should I tell her you're called?" "Nobody. Mr. Nobody. Mr. Bones. Mr. Had Enough of. And Mr. Arthritis. Now get out and leave me alone." "Okay," I said. I stood up and started to back out between the tea chest. I hesitated. "Will you think about the baby?" I said. "Huh?" "Will you think about her in hospital? Will you think about her getting better?" He clicked his tongue. "Please," I said. "Yes," blinking yes. I moved towards the door. "Yes," I heard him say again. "Yes, I will." Outside, night had almost given way to day. The blackbirds were on the garage roof, bleating out its song. Black and pink and blue were mingling in the sky. I picked up cobwebs and blue bottles of myself. I heard the hooting as I turned back towards the house. Hoot, 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 hoot. I looked into the sky over the garden and saw the owl heading homewards on great silent wings. I put my hands together and blew into the gaps between my thumbs. Hoot, 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 hoot. Then I seemed to see a face, round and pale inside the darkness of an upstairs window in Mina's house. I put my hand together again. Hoot, 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 hoot. Something answered. Hoot, 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 hoot.
Chapter 17 of Skellig. At lunchtime I went to her front garden. She was sitting there on the lawn on a spread-out blanket beneath the tree. She had her books, her pencils, her paints scattered around her. I was off school again. All morning I'd been clearing the wilderness again. Dad had been working in the front room, painting, stripping the walls, getting ready to hang wallpaper. "The mystery man," she said. "Hello again." She had a book open at a skeleton of a bird. She'd been copying this into her sketchbook. "You're doing science," I said. She laughed. "See how school shutters you," she said. "I'm drawing, painting, reading, looking. I'm feeling the sun and the air on my skin. I'm listening to the blackbird's song. I'm opening my mind. Oh, school." She picked up a book of poems from her blanket. "Listen," she said. She sat up straight, coughed to clear her throat, and held the book open before her. "To go to school in a summer morn, oh, it drives all joy away. Under a cruel eye outworn, the little ones spend the day in sighing and dismay." She closed the book. "William Blake again? You've heard of William Blake?" "No." "He painted pictures and wrote poems. Much of the time he wore no clothes. He saw angels in his garden." She beckoned me over. I stepped over the wall and sat on the blanket by her. "Shh, be quiet," she whispered. "Be very quiet. Listen." "Listen to what?" "Just listen." I listened. I heard the traffic on Crow Road and the roads beyond. I heard birds singing. I heard the breeze in the trees. I heard my own breath. "What can you hear?" I told her. "Listen deeper," she said. "Listen harder. Listen for the tiniest, sweetest noise." I closed my eyes this time and listened again. "What am I listening for?" I said. "It comes from above you, from inside the tree." "Inside the tree? Just do it, Michael." I tried to concentrate on the tree, on the branches and the leaves, on the tiny shoots that grew out from the branches. I heard the shoots and leaves moving in the breeze. "It comes from the nest," she said. "Just listen." I listened. And at last I heard it. A tiny squeaking sound far off, like it was coming from another world. I caught my breath. "Yes," I whispered. "The chicks," she said. Once I'd found it and knew what it was and where it was, I could hear it all along with the other stronger noises. I could open my eyes, I could look at Mina, then I could close my eyes again and hear the blackbird chicks cheeping in the nest. I could imagine them there, packed close together in their nest. "Their bones are more delicate than ours," she said. I opened my eyes. She was copying the skeleton again. "Their bones are almost hollow. Did you know that?" I think I did, yeah." She picked up a bone that was lying beside her books. "This is from a pigeon, we believe," she said. She snapped the bone in half and it splintered. She showed me that it wasn't solid inside, but it was a mesh of tiny, thin, bony struts. "The presence of air cavities within the bone is known as pneumatism," she said. "Feel it." I rested the bone on my palm. I looked at the spaces inside. I felt the splinters. "This too is the result of evolution," she said. "The bone is light but strong. It is adapted so the birds can fly. Over millions of years, the bird has developed an anatomy that enables it to fly, as you know from the skeleton drawings that we did the other day." She looked at me. "You understand? Have you covered this in school?" "I think so." She watched me. "One day I'll tell you about being called the Archaeopteryx," she said. "How's the baby today?" "We'll see this afternoon, but I think she'll be okay." "Oh, good." She put her hands together, blew between her thumbs and made an owl sound. "Brilliant," she said. "Brilliant." "I made the hooting noise last night," I said, "just after dawn, very early in the morning." "Did you? Were you looking out then? Did you make the hooting sound?" "I can't be certain." can't. I dream and I walk in my sleep. Sometimes I do things strange and I think they were just dreams. Sometimes I dream them and they were real. She stared at me. I dreamed about you last night, she said. Did you? Yes, but it's not important. You said you had a mystery, something to show me. I have. Then show me. Not now, this afternoon maybe. She gazed at me. You were outside, she said. There was an eerie light. You were very pale. There were cobwebs and flies all over you, and you were hooting just like an owl. We stared at each other. It was in my dream, she said. Dad started calling, Michael, Michael. I'll see you later this afternoon, I whispered and ran off. Skellig, Chapter 18. Mrs. Dando was on the phone, said Dad on the way to the hospital. She was asking about you. It's nice. She said your mates want you back. I'll see them Sunday. You're not missing school then? I shrugged. Dunno. Maybe you could go back soon, eh? Said Dad. You don't want to miss out on too much. I learn a lot from Mina. She knows about lots of things, like birds and evolution. Aye, there's that. And of course you've learned the Chinese menu off by heart. At the hospital, the baby was still in the glass case, but the wires and tubes weren't in her. Mum lifted the lid back and I held the baby on my knee. I tried to feel if she was getting bigger and stronger. She squirmed and I felt the long, thin muscles in her back as she stretched. She took my finger in her fist and tried to squeeze it tight. She opened her eyes wide. Look, said Dad, she's smiling at you. But it didn't seem like a smile to me. A doctor then came to see us. Dr. Bloom. She's coming on then, said Dad. Flying, said the doctor. We'll have her back soon then. Dr. Bloom shrugged. He touched the baby's cheek. We still need to keep an eye on her, he said. A few days maybe. He smiled at me. Try not to worry, lad, he said. I touched the baby's shoulder blades and felt how tiny and flexible they were. I felt the thin rattle of her breath. She'll be running in the garden soon, Mum said, and she laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. She took the baby from me and rubbed cream on my skin again. You look tired, she said, and she looked at Dad. Have you two been staying up too late? Dead right we have, said Dad. It's been videos and Chinese takeaways all night, every night, hasn't it, son? I nodded. Yes, it has. I went out into the corridor. I asked a nurse if she knew where the people with arthritis went. She said lots of them went to Ward 34 on the top floor. She said she thought that it was a silly place to put people with bad bones who had such trouble walking and climbing stairs. I jumped into a lift and went up. I stepped out of the lift and a woman came past me pushing a Zimmer frame. She rested, puffing and grinning. Oh, I'm knackered, she panted. Once up and down the ward and 3 times round the landing. Absolutely done. She leaned on the frame and looked at me in the eye. I'll be dancing soon, though. Her hands were twisted and her knuckles were all swollen. Arthritis, I said. That's right. Arthur is what I've got. But I've got 2 new hips and I'll be dancing soon. That'll show him who's boss. For a while at least. I've got a friend with arthritis, I said. Ah, poor soul. What will help him? Well, arthritis, usually ends up winning in the end. But in the meantime, some folks swear by cod liver oil and a positive mind. For me, it's prayers to the lady and Dr. McNabola with his scissors and his saw and his plastic bits and pieces and glue. She winked at me. Keep on moving, that's the thing. Keep the old bones moving. Don't let everything seize up. She shuffled on, humming her tune. I think it was Lord of the Dance. I followed the signs to Ward 34. I looked inside. There were dozens of beds, all facing each other across the room. There were people practising moving on Zimmer frames. Some lay in bed smiling and knitting, wincing as they called across the ward to each other. Some lay exhausted and filled with pain. At the far end, a cluster of doctors and students in white coats gathered around a man in black. He spoke and they scribbled in notebooks. He strode through the ward and they followed. He pointed at patients and they nodded and waved. He stopped at several of the beds and smiled for a moment as he listened to the patients. He shook hands with a nurse and headed quickly for the door. I stood there as the cluster approached me. "Excuse me," I said. The man in black strode on. "Dr. McNabola," I said. He stopped and looked down at me. The doctors and students came to a halt around me. "What's good for arthritis?" I said. He blinked and grinned. "The needle," he said, and he pretended to squeeze a great syringe. Deep injections right into the joints. He winced, pretending to be in pain, and the doctors and students sniggered. "Then I get out my saw," he said. He made sawing movements with his arm, and he gasped and twisted his face in agony. "Cut out the bits that are all bad and put new bits in," he said, and he pretended to thread a needle and sew. "Stitch it up, good as new." I sighed with relief, as if all his pain had gone. He leaned towards me. "Are you a sufferer, young man?" I shook my head. "I've got a friend who is." The doctor stood up very straight. "Then you tell your friend to come to me. I'll needle him, I'll saw him, and I'll fix him up and send him home, nearly as good as new." All the doctors sniggered again. "Failing that," he said, "the advice is simple. Keep cheerful, don't give up, remain active, take cod liver oil, and don't allow those joints to grind to a halt." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Anything else?" I shook my head. He looked at the doctors around me. "Any other advice for the young man's friend?" he asked them. They all thought and then shook their heads too. "Then let us carry on," he said, and he strode down the corridor. I stood there thinking. "Are you looking for someone?" said a nurse. "No," she smiled. "He's a good doctor really," she said, "but he does like to show off. You tell your friend to keep moving and try to smile. Don't make it easy for arthritis." I ran back to the lift and back to the baby ward. Mum and Dad were sitting holding hands, gazing down at the baby. "Hello," said Mum. She tried to smile, but her voice was flat and I could see that she'd been crying again. "Hello." "You've been a while." "All those Chinese takeaways," said Dad, trying to get us to laugh. "Cod liver oil," she said. "That'll sort you out." She held me tight. "You're my best boy," she whispered. "Whatever happens, you'll always be my best boy." At home, as Dad prepared to get started again on the front room, I took a bottle of brown ale from the fridge and hid it with my torch just inside the garage door. I got my Swiss Army knife from my room and I took a handful of cod liver oil capsules from the bathroom and put them in my pocket. I asked if it was okay if I went out to see Mina again. "Yeah, don't worry about me," said Dad. "I'll do all the dirty work. You run around and have a good time." Chapter 19. Her blanket and books were still on the lawn, but she wasn't there. I looked up into the tree, and she wasn't there either. I stepped over the wall and went to her front door and rang the doorbell. Her mother came. "Is Mina in?" I asked. Her mother had jet black hair just like Mina's. She wore an apron covered in daubs of paint and clay. "She is?" she said. She put her hand out. "You must be Michael. I'm Mrs. McKee." I shook her hand. "Mina!" she shouted. "How's the baby?" she asked. "Very well. Well, we think she'll be very well." Babies are stubborn things. They're strugglers and fighters. Tell your parents I'm thinking of them. "Okay, I will." Mina came to the door. She had a paint-splashed apron on too. "We're modelling," she said. "Come and see." She led us through to the kitchen. There were big balls of clay in plastic bags on the table. The table was covered in a plastic sheet and there were knives and wooden tools. Mina's book of bird drawings was open at the blackbird. She showed me the clay she was working with. It was just a lump, but I could see the outline of a bird coming. A broad body, a pointed bill and a flattened tail. She added more clay and pinched the body and began to draw out its wings. "Mina's fixated on birds just now," said Mrs. McKee. "Sometimes it's things that swim, sometimes it's things that slink through the night, sometimes it's things that creep and crawl, but just now it's things that fly." I looked around. There was a shelf full of clay models, foxes, fish, lizards, hedgehogs, little mice, and an owl with its great round head and its pointed beak and fierce claws. "Did you make all those?" I asked. Mina laughed. "They're brilliant," I said. She showed me how the clay would be shaped if the bird were in flight, and how she could mark the feathers in it with a special pointed knife. Once it's fired, that's cooked, and glazed, that's painted with varnish, I'll hang it from the ceiling. I picked up a piece of clay and rubbed it between my fingers and rolled it between my palms. It was cold and grainy. Mina licked her finger and rubbed the clay, showing how it could be worked to become shiny and smooth. I watched her, copied her. I worked the clay again and drew it into the shape of a snake, pushed it all together again and made the shape of a human head. I thought of the baby. I started to shape her thin, delicate form, her arms and legs and her head. Like magic, eh? Said Mina. Yeah, like magic. Sometimes I dream I make them so real they walk away or fly out of my hands, said Mina. Do you use clay at school? Yeah, we do sometimes. Well, we did in one class that I was in. Michael could come and work with us sometimes, said Mina. Mrs McKee looked at me. Her eyes were as piercing as Mina's, but more gentle. He could, she said. I've told him what we think of schools, said Mina. Mrs McKee laughed. And I've told him about William Blake. I went on making the baby. I tried to form the features of her face. The clay started to dry out in the heat of my fingers and started to crumble. I caught Mina's eye. I tried to tell her with my eyes that we had to go. She understood. Mum, can I go for a walk with Michael? She said immediately. Yes, wrap up your clay in plastic so it doesn't dry out. You can get on with it later when you come back. Off you go. Chapter 20. I led her quickly along the front street and then I turned into the back lane. I led her past the high back garden walls. Where are we going? She said. Not far. I looked at her yellow top and blue jeans. The place is filthy, I said, and it's dangerous. She buttoned the blouse to her throat. She clenched her fists. Good, she said. Keep going, Michael. I opened our back garden gate. Here, she said. She stared at me. Yes, yes. I stood at the garage door with her and she peered into the gloom. I picked up the beer and the torch. We'll need these, I said. I took the capsules from my pocket and these as well. Her eyes narrowed and she looked right into me. Just trust me, I said. Then I hesitated. It's not just that it's dangerous, I said. I'm worried that you won't see what I think it is. She looked at my hand and squeezed it. I'll see whatever's there, she whispered. Come on, take me in. I switched on the torch and stepped inside. Things scratched and scuttled across the floor as usual. I felt Mina tremble a bit and her palms began to sweat. I held her hand tightly. It's all right, I said. Just keep close to me. We squeezed between the rubbish and the broken furniture. Cobwebs snapped on our clothes and skin. Dead blue bottles attached themselves to us. The ceiling creaked and dust fell from the rotten timbers. As we approached the tea chests, I started to shake. Maybe Mina would see nothing. Maybe I'd been wrong all along. Maybe dreams and truth were just a useless muddle in my mind. I leaned forward and shone the light into the gap behind the tea chest. Again, he squeaked. I heard Mina stifle a cry. I felt her hand stiffen and I pulled her closer. It's all right, I whispered. I've brought a friend, I said. Like I said I would. This is Mina. He turned his eyes towards her and then lowered them again. I showed him the brown ale. I bought this as well. He laughed, but he didn't smile. I squeezed through to him. I snapped the cap off the bottle with the opener on the knife and crouched beside him. He tipped his head back and let me pour some of the beer into his mouth. He swallowed. Some of it trickled from his mouth onto his black suit. Oh, nectar, he sighed. Drink of the gods. He tipped his head back again and I poured again. I looked back at Mina's dark eyes, looking down at us, her pale face, her mouth, and her open and gaping in astonishment. Who are you? She whispered. Mister had enough of you, he squeaked. I saw a doctor, I said. Not Dr. Death, one that could fix you. No doctors, nobody, nothing. Let me be. You'll die. You'll crumble away and die. Crumble, crumble, crumble. He tipped his head back. More beer. I poured more beer. I bought these as well, I said. I held out a cod liver oil capsule to him. People swear by them, I said. He sniffed. They stink of fish, he squeaked. Slimy, slithery, swimming things. There were tears in my eyes. He just sits here, I said. He doesn't care. It's like he wants to die. It's like he's waiting to die. I don't know what to do. Do nothing, he squeaked. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. Mina came in beside us and she crouched staring at his face as dry and pale as plaster, at the dead blue bottles and cobwebs, at the spiders and beetles that scuttled across him. She took the torch from me. She shone it onto his thin body in the dark suit, on the legs stretched out on the floor and on the swollen hands that rested at his side. She picked up one of the dark furry balls from beside him. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Nobody." She reached out and touched his cheek. "Dry and cold," she whispered. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough." Are you dead?" He groaned. "Kids' questions, always the same." "Tell her things," I said. "She's clever. She'll know what to do." He laughed again, but he didn't smile. "Let me see her," he said. Mina turned the torch to her face, and it was brilliant white, with pitch-dark gaps where her mouth and eyes were. "I'm called Mina," she said. She sighed. "I'm Mina," she said. You're Mina," he said, "and I'm sick to death." She touched his hands. She lifted his filthy cuff and touched his scrawny, twisted wrists. "Calcification," she said. "The process by which the bone hardens and becomes inflexible. The process by which the body turns to stone." "Not as stupid as she looks, is she?" he squeaked. "It is linked to another process," she said, "by which the mind too becomes inflexible. It stops thinking and imagining. It becomes as hard as bone. It is no longer a mind. It is a lump of bone wrapped in a wall of stone. This process is ossification." He sighed. "More beer," he said. I poured more beer into his mouth. "Take her away," he whispered. The roof trembled in the breeze. Dust fell on us. Mina and I crouched close together, our knees almost resting on him. She twisted her face as she caught the stench of his breath. I took her hand and guided it to his shoulder blades. I pressed her fingertips against the bulge underneath his jacket. She leaned across him, felt his other shoulder blade. When she looked at me, her eyes in the torchlight were shining bright. Her face was almost touching his. Their pale skin bloomed in the torchlight. "What are you?" she whispered. No answer. He sat there with his head lowered and his eyes closed. "We can help you," she whispered. No answer. I felt the tears running from my eyes. "There's somewhere we could take you," said Mina. "It's safer there. Nobody would know. You could just sit there dying too, if that's what you really want to do." Something brushed past us. I shone the torch down and saw Whisper entering the space behind the tea chests. "Whisper," said Mina. The cat moved to his side and pressed itself against his damaged hands. He sighed. "Smooth and soft," he whispered. His knuckles moved against the cat's soft fur. "Sweet thing," he whispered. Whisper purred. The timbers creaked. Dust fell on us again. "Please let us take you somewhere else," I said. "More beer," he whispered. I held out a cod liver oil capsule. "Take one of these as well," I said. He tipped his head back. I poured the beer in. I dropped the capsule onto his pale tongue. He opened his eyes and he looked at Mina deeply, and she looked deeply at him. "You must let us help you," she said. He was silent for a long time. "Oh, do what you want," he sighed.
I'm just going to talk to you about Skellig, Lesson 8. Having listened to chapters 16 to 20, what we'd like you to do today is to write a diary entry. Now, it's not the first diary entry you will have done, so you should have the idea of what to do, but I'm just going to run through things to give you an idea and to reinforce what you're probably already thinking. So today, continue to write the diary entry from the point of view of Michael. Now, I've seen from some of the learning that you've been doing that you have a really good understanding of Michael and how he's feeling, so try and bring that into your writing today. What have been the main events to happen in the recent chapters? You might like to make each event a paragraph as you do your own box up. Because I've been doing lots of scaffolding for you, but I feel that you should be able to move on and maybe do your own box up today and have one event to equal one paragraph. Now, if you think about the toolkit, you need to include your noun phrases, your parenthesis, and again here, information and direction as to what parenthesis is and how to use this. Fronted adverbials and relative clauses we'd also like you to use. Again, have this screen in front of you when you're doing your learning so it reminds you of what to put in, or maybe write down the toolkit and tick each item off as you've used each item successfully. I've done a very short model text as well because I just feel that sometimes the hardest part is when you want to begin. So you could use your beginning as, so much has happened recently. I feel that Mina, the girl who lived next door, is becoming a good friend to me, with an example of a subclause there. Good luck. We're really enjoying reading all of your writing. Upload it to Caesar if you would like to, or hand it in at the office, or send it on Purple Mash. Good luck.